team apparently used away games to run guns around Catalonia, two armed groups. The legend says that they would hide pistols inside leather balls. Hello there, ladies and or gentlemen, boys and or girls. You are very welcome back here on the Hispanophiles podcast, Travel in Spain with only half a brain. This is the only podcast to ever survived the Inquisition. My name is James Brufrey, aka Peter Pan con Tomate, and welcome back also to GolGolGolGolGol. This is the podcast series in which we explore the history and culture, past and present, of this fair country here, Spain, through its football fan culture. In each episode of GolGolGolGol, we basically take stories from the football fan landscape in this country to get closer to Spain and understand it more. And in today's episode, we are staying here in Barcelona. We are going to the cool Poblenou district in East Barcelona to talk about Júpiter, one of the most extraordinary and unlikely football clubs here in this country, one that immortalizes the anarchic wilderness of Barcelona in the 1920s. We're going to be exploring the club's history, its achievements, its controversies, and its cultural relevance now in our time. Does that sound good? Let's go. Before we get there, however, we need to delve into our regular segments, starting with, of course, the Spanish vocabulary of the week. And today we are going to be looking at the phrase no puede pasarse por alto. No puede pasarse por alto. It cannot be overlooked. Pasarse por alto, to be overlooked. Something I think I was reading a book recently, I can't remember which one, and I saw that and I thought, I'd never realised how to express that idea being overlooked in Spanish, so I made a little note, and I thought that's one we're going to be using on the podcast. Pasarse por alto, to be overlooked. Hold on to it, incorporate it into your conversations, find a good opportunity to use it, and let me know in comments how you got on. No puede pasarse por alto. It cannot be overlooked. We move on to our second regular segment, which is, of course, the Spanish news story of the week. And in this one, we are going to the wonderful region of Galicia, one of the top regions in our episode dedicated to the ranking of every Spanish comunidad, from my least favourite to my most favourite. Go take a listen if you have not already. Galicia ranked very highly because of its idiosyncrasies, because of its very unique, distinct culture, language, terrain, all the rest of it. And one of the main reasons foreigners are familiar with Galicia is, of course, the Camino de Santiago. That's right, it's the pilgrimage to the incredible city Santiago de Compostela inside Galicia. And the news about this is the fact that they have changed the official rules that you have to comply with in order to be able to say that you have completed the Camino. Now, all you have to do to be able to say you've taken part in the Camino de Santiago is to have done minimum 100 kilometers continuously. You can't do 50k in one place, get a train to a next city and do 50k onwards. You've got to do a minimum of 100k continuously. And you need to collect 2 stamps per day in your credencial, which is basically you can consider it the pilgrim passport that people doing the Camino have. And for cyclists, the minimum distance in one go is 200 kilometers. Honestly, I didn't know people cycled the Camino. Obviously, caminar, camino, the implication there is that you're on foot rather than cycling, but there we go. I guess some people do it on bicycles. But where the norms and rules regarding the Camino have changed, you can do any stretch of any route. You don't have to actually go all the way on foot. You can do 100k, let's say, from Burgos to Leon. I'm not entirely sure if that is 100k, but just an example. And then go from Leon to Santiago directly, as long as you've done 100 kilometers on your walk. Seems a bit odd to me, but I don't make the rules. But the one thing that is still mandatory, the final 1 kilometer of your Camino has to be the walk through the city of Santiago to the cathedral. What a cathedral, if you haven't seen it. I think on the back of the Spanish 1 cent euro coin, you can see the cathedral on there. It's one of the most beautiful ones in the country. So yes, they've changed the Camino. I've not done it yet. I long to. It's on my Spanish bucket list. I will do it one day during the summer months, where the climate is a little bit more accommodating of you walking every day in your shorts Why have they changed this? I guess to make it more accessible, a bit easier to encourage tourism. I guess if more people are able to complete it and then therefore say they've done it, that kind of, I guess, encourages tourism, encourages people to think they can give it a go and then come and then, of course, spend money through a lot of rural, rugged, less developed central and northern Spain, where some places, I guess, need the money and they depend quite a lot on it. For me, that feels like a bit of a cop-out. If you're going to do, I mean, this maybe speaks to a partially masochistic personality, but if you're going to do quite a tough physical endurance feat challenge, desafío, then you're cheapening your experience if you make it easier for yourself, right? Is it just me that thinks that? I hope not, but anyway, so I think it's a bit of a cop-out changing it to make it easier, but I'm willing to overlook that if it helps promote tourism in Spain and gets more people coming here to spend their money to keep the economy alive, which ultimately I benefit from. So cheers to you guys. If you have done the Camino, or if you're planning to this year, let me know in comments, and maybe I'll see you there. And we move on to the main talking point of the episode, Júpiter Sports Club. Here in Barcelona, the cult club from the working class barrios of eastern Barcelona that found its identity in the violent partisan struggles of the dangerous 1920s and 1930s in Catalonia. Goodness gracious me, let's learn all about it. Starting off, books matter, reading is important, feeding your brain, feeding your mind matters. So we're going to start off by just giving a quick shout out to some of the books that really played a part in shaping this episode. The first one, Futbolítica, una vuelta al mundo a través de clubes políticamente singulares, by Ramón Usal, published by Altamarea. The next one I want to mention, España, A Brief History of Spain, by Giles Tremlett, published by Head of Zeus. Giles Tremlett, love the guy. If you're listening, I'd love to interview you one day. And the third one, A Homage to Barcelona by Con Tolbin. I think I've pronounced that correctly. It's an Irish name, so forgive me if I've got it wrong. Published by Picador, another great read about this amazing city if you want some good travel writing about Barcelona to understand the core fibres, the DNA of the city. That's the one to go for. Shout out also to the blog Futbolteca. We used Futbolteca in previous episodes of GolGolGolGol. Once again, this blog has proven to be a treasure chest of information about more obscure, regional, lower league football clubs in the country. Futbolteca in Spanish, if you want to learn about some small-time team in the 5th division, that's the place to go. One other source that proved useful in the creation of this podcast episode was a visit to the Museu Olímpic y de Sport Joan Antoni Samaranch, the Olympic and Sports Museum of Joan Antoni Samaranch here in Barcelona on the Sports Olympic Complex in Montjuic. I was there last weekend, and they put on a tidy exhibition dedicated to Júpiter, the club. Cool little museum, €6.50 to enter, which is maybe on the steeper side given its size, but it's dedicated to the world of Olympic sports and sport in Barcelona, showcasing lots of different sporting disciplines with historic memorabilia, and the exhibition proved very useful, so I wanted to give a little mention to those guys as well. Before we begin, I'm sure it's come to your attention that the name of this football club, Júpiter, is a planet in our solar system. I really, really hope for the well-being of our society that I'm not the first ever person telling you that you're already aware of that. Astronomy is something that I have a bit of a secret passion for, my vie d'intègre. One little thing that I don't talk about too much, but I love learning about. So throughout this episode, what I've decided to do is play a little game. I am going to pepper words related to the cosmos, space, astronomy throughout this episode, sprinkled in there. The ones that you notice, please let me know in comments. Unfortunately, however, I could not find enough room for Uranus. I know, I'm a little bit prouder of that one than I perhaps should be, but thank you for giggling. The start seems like a perfectly good place to begin, and we're going to begin at the start. The football landscape that Júpiter was born into. Barcelona, often considered to be Iberia's Manchester, a key area of industry in the Mediterranean in the mid-19th century. A port city, so it had maritime links that offered lots of commercial opportunity. Barcelona was at the foot of many hills, which meant rivers, which meant moving water for factories and the bourgeois class that were able to finance ventures and drive economic growth. As a consequence, Barcelona was one of the main industrial areas of Spain and the Iberian Peninsula in the mid-1800s. The first steam-powered machinery was brought to the city in 1831. A year later, the city saw the first automatic looms installed. That had transformed it into a hive of cotton and textile production. Indeed, Catalonia became the global number 4 in cotton production after England, France, and the USA by the end of the 19th century. And the very first Iberian rail line was that from Barcelona to Mataró, just up the coast, laid in 1848. Barcelona, therefore, because of this industrial activity, became a key area of British presence in the second half of the 20th century. And whenever Brits in the 1800s explored, what did they bring with them? Nope, not just alcoholism, also football. So in the 1890s, football arrives in Barcelona, courtesy of the British. 1893, what happened then? You can probably guess. Correct. The Titan club FC Barcelona was founded in 1893. What was also founded around that time? La Escocesa, the Scottish one. This was the common name of the factory Johnston & Shields & Co. Limited, owned by John Shields and Edward B. Steegman in Poblenou, that neighbourhood we're going to be talking about in a second. It should come no surprise that this was a textile factory. The two men, Shields and Steegman, they approved for their employees the founding of a football club to entertain the men who worked for them. Participation was exclusively for British members at the time, and most of them were Scottish. And the Escocese Football Club was founded in 1899 by Peter McCann, spelled M-A-U-C-H-A-N, but I think it's pronounced McCann, who also played for FC Barcelona from 1901 to 1904. Fast forward a little bit, 1907 to 1908, he encouraged his younger brothers Archibald, David and William to play together in an open ground in Poblenou. These three boys obviously involved in Escocese Football Club at the time, but that club was not, it didn't operate in the way in which we consider a football club now. It was just a network of players, kind of split into two factions, and they would play each other in very low organisation games, often poorly planned and in many cases sporadic and spontaneous. Stadium Nacional and Anglo-Espanyol were the two main factions inside Escocés, and they would play each other and also different teams from the Poblenou neighbourhood. The quality was inconsistent. Like I said, games were not scheduled particularly what we would now consider in a professional way, and they had very few resources to play, certainly where ground and location are concerned. But come 1909, 12th of May, both of those two factions, Stadium Nacional and Anglo-Espanyol, were merged to form a single entity, Club Deportivo Júpiter. Although first playing in white, their shirts were quickly swapped for light blue, celeste, as it's referred to in Spanish. And this new entity, this new formally recognised organisation that played football, was founded at the Cebrián Brewery, and to this day, on Rambla Poblenou, in front of the Tio Che ice cream shop and horchata bar, there's a little plaque that commemorates the founding of Júpiter Football Club. Who ran it at the time? President was José Buch, the vice president was José Casellas, secretary Mariano Tellá, the assistant secretary Manuel Vilaseca, David McCann, he was the Scottish worker Faber and Coates, he was chosen as the initial treasurer of the club, and that same surname, Jamie McCann, he was Jupiter's initial accountant. It will come as a surprise that they did not name the club after the biggest planet in our solar system. It was named after a hot air balloon, of all things. Yes, indeed, every Sunday, I think in the summer months in the first decade of the 20th century, down at Marbella, nope, not that grotty little place in Malaga province where your aunt goes and embarrasses herself every summer. Marbella is a beach in Barcelona that runs pretty much parallel to Poblenou itself. Not my favourite. It is normally filled on a weekend with families, so make of that what you will. It's not the calmest place to go and lay in the sun, let's put it that way. Every Sunday there would be hot air balloon contests at this place at the time. And the contest, basically which one was biggest, which one was most beautiful, which one was most efficiently inflated, then flew, which one could fly the highest. The McCann brothers attended a hot air balloon show that weekend in May 1909 at Marbella, and they were suitably impressed by a massive balloon called Jupiter, and they found it fitting to name their new club after that balloon. Club Deportivo Júpiter, the word Deportivo hints at a multidisciplinary nature of the entity. And throughout its history, Júpiter athletes have represented the organisation in many different sports. We're talking roller hockey, cycling, a huge one here in Catalonia, swimming, handball and athletics. And on the subject of athletics, one member, Roser Raventos, she was the victor of the Catalan Women's Cross Country Championships in 1933. It appears she was a very accomplished athlete. She was proficient in the javelin throw, the long jump, short distance running, 100 metre, 200 metre, and in my notes here I've got Júpiter produced the Venus. Ha ha ha, very good. The earliest media mention we have that confirms the existence of Júpiter was on the 23rd of November 1911. We can be confident that there were earlier media references to the club, but that's the earliest surviving one we have. And that came in 1911 on the 23rd of November, courtesy of a publication in El Mundo Deportivo. In 1912, the year later, the club signed up to the Federación Catalana, meaning it was now federated, meaning it could now compete in officially sanctioned contests, not just friendlies against rival neighbour clubs. And this was done during the presidency of Antonio Salvà, who clearly saw potential in what the club was doing and decided to raise the bar with regards to expectation and sporting calibre. It's very tempting to think, therefore, that now the club with a board, with a clear purpose, intention, official documentation, and now federation, easy to think that it was all up, literally, as in a hot air balloon, from the get-go. No, the first decade after federation was very turbulent. There was a lot of movement around the city to try and find a suitable long-term home that they could call their own. The first ground at Passeig Campo Cantí from 1909 to 1910, literally less than 2 years. This was a space in Poblenou that had where a convent had been before that had sadly burnt down. From there they went to Camp de la Bota, only for 1 year. Yet again, in reality, this was little more than a patch of wasteland that younger members of Júpiter used to kick a football about on at the top of Diagonal, far east of the city, just before you get to Barcelona, in the Besòs neighbourhood of the city. It's now no longer a sports ground, lamentably, but there is a nice little Olympic port nearby. That could be a quite nice walk if you're in that part of town. From there, they moved to Carrer Taulat 139 to 233 in 1912, opposite Le Bon gas factory, again linking back to the working class nature of Poblenou, something that will become very relevant shortly in the history of Júpiter, close to where Marbella currently is, so again quite relevant with regards to the core DNA of this club. And then in 1914 we see another move yet again to Campo de Can Saladrigas. On the 12th of July 1914, there was a lot of work undertaken at this site with regards to making it a functional, suitable ground for a football club. In 1917, Júpiter won the second category, beating CE Manresa 1-0 in the final. Worth noting at this stage in its history, Júpiter has participated in a total of 8 seasons in the second tier of Spanish football. Never in the top flight, lamentably. It does look like that is never going to happen, certainly in my lifetime, but who knows. But yeah, 8 total seasons in the second division of Spanish club football. In 1919, in the Campo de Can Saladrigas, floodlights were installed for the first time, meaning that Júpiter, for the very first time, could play at night and not just under the stars. And in 1921, another move, this time to Campo de Carrer Lope de Vega, just off Carrer Lul, the core of Poblenou, very much the centre of this part of town. The ground there, a capacity of 8,000 at the time. In 12 years, that's 5 different changes of home, 5 different changes of stadium. But all of those locations were in Poblenou. The club was constantly in orbit in Poblenou, one of my favourite parts of Barcelona. And I think now is probably a good time to talk a little bit more about this part of town, because it's not as well known to the new arrivals, to the tourists here in Barcelona. As the name would suggest, Poblenou, that just means new town in Catalan. Poblenou. Very young part of Barcelona. It used to be little more than a satellite fishing village to Barcelona, with a few livestock farms and a few fishing huts whatnot, people making nets for fishing, that type of thing. Basically defined by the beach, Carré de la Marina, and Diagonal, forming a triangle in the eastern part of the city. It is residential, but there's lots of industry as well, lots of factories. But now some of these old factories are homes for startups, co-working spaces, new offices, lots of change, lots of things happening in Poblenou. It is not a glamorous part of town. Don't go there expecting some of these amazing facades that you'll find, for example, in Eixample, always incredible Gaudi buildings. No, that's not what Poblenou is, but it is affordable. Because it gets less footfall from the tourists, it is quiet. Because there are fewer tourists, therefore it is safer, there are fewer pickpockets, it is easy to navigate, it still has the grid structure like a Champlain, but it is safe, and it does have cool night spots. Again, because real estate is cheaper in Poblenou, a lot of the up-and-coming musicians, art spaces, nightclubs, they choose to take a lot of these old factories and they make them into cool places to go out, such as Razzmatazz, which I only mentioned because it's one of my favourite clubs in Spain. Unlike Gracia, Bon, Raval, Poble Sec, Poblenou is not covered in leftist partisan graffiti. However, Júpiter has attracted the obreros from Poblenou during its long tenure in this part of the city. The first decades of the 20th century, a lot of the people, a lot of the working classes in Poblenou were Catalonians and the Brits, as we discussed. People with little formal education, and the zeitgeist at the time in Catalonia, there was a push for greater worker rights and fairer treatment. Thus, there grew the association with what is now a conventional facet of Spanish left-wing politics, which is anarchism, unionism, and Catalonian separatism. Three, in theory, very different ideologies and movements, but all conventionally related to one another, and now also seen to be related to the core fan base of Club Esportiu Júpiter. In this era, the playing colours went from the celeste blue to maroon and grey. Now, I heard hearsay, I don't know when, but a while ago, to say this was chosen. Grey represents steel, the maroon represents the fire, the embers that you would see in a steelworks. Lovely thought, lovely image. It kind of makes sense, I guess. It also does give the club a very distinct colour set in their home jerseys. I do like the way it looks. Sadly, I think this is just erroneous. I've not found any evidence while conducting my research for this podcast to suggest that the board deliberately chose grey and maroon for the relations to two core elements of the working class. Also, Poblenou, steelworks, not really part of the gig here. That was more Bilbao, where steel was manufactured in Spain. I fear the reason grey and maroon were chosen is far more mundane, far more prosaic. From what I've read, it was just to differentiate from blue and red, which were the predominant colours of choice for many local clubs at the time in Barcelona, of course, to replicate the success of FCB. Need I say any more? And those political connections we discussed, anarchism, unionism, separatism, those have stuck to this club to this day in spite of some very turbulent times during the 1920s and 30s, which is what we'll discuss now. The 1920s. On the field, this was the Época Dorada for Júpiter, their golden era. 1925 stands out as the key year, and this year they were the champion of Spain's Campeonato de España de Segunda Categoría. Basically a knockout competition for second division sides from all over the country. Júpiter beat Sporting Gijón, another giant of the game, 4-1 in Valencia in the Mestalla. And also that year, 1925, they were the Catalonian champions of La Segunda Categoría, making 1925 a historic double year and a stellar season for Júpiter. 1928-29, they were the champions of the Campeonato de Catalunya de la Segunda Categoría Preferente. Thus, that year, they were promoted to the Primera Categoría del Campeonato de Catalunya, and going back to 1925, on the 14th of June, they played crosstown champions, the big boys FC Barcelona, in Les Corts in a match in homage to Orfeó Català, which was a choral society in the city at the time for the entertainment of the bourgeoisie, the people owning the factories. High art, singing, music, language, of course, for the Catalonians has always been a big part of their identity and therefore a big part of entertainment in this city. 14,000 people attended that exhibition match in Les Corts in Camp Nou at the time. Of course, the other side of town, much closer to Apollo nightclub, for those of you who are familiar, and the British Royal Marine Band performed at that match. They performed God Save the King, which was met with reverence and silence. Then they played La Marseillaise, which of course is the tune of what is still the Spanish national anthem, but that was met with boos and whistles by spectators. This brought heavy sanctions and penalties to FC Barcelona as a consequence. The question, why? Well, to answer that, we go back to 1923, and we have to talk about the military coup of Miguel Primo de Rivera. Primo de Rivera was Spain's dictator. Regime agents engaged in heavy censorship and repression of spaces and media for political challenge and dissent. It was a big part of what was going on. Catalonian separatism and those seen to be propagating it and supporting it, that was purged. The flag of Catalonian independence, something that was first presented on the 11th of September 1918, that was also targeted. By this point, Júpiter had already become an apex for left-wing politicism in Poblenou neighbourhood in Barcelona, with over 2,000 socios at this point, and symbolically they had included the blue star representing the flag of Catalonian independence on their badge at the time, with the Serenia, the flag of Catalonian nationality, in the lower half with the blue star above. It was therefore a direct nod to the notion of Catalonian independence at a time when that was being cracked down upon and censored. Therefore, in April 1924, Judge Cristobal Fernandez submitted a complaint to the civil governor of Barcelona regarding Júpiter's pro-Catalonian credentials and badge. The governor ordered its dismissal and instructed the club to replace it with a count's crown with its playing colours, which had now become green and white, more aesthetic changes to the club itself. This era, 1924, during the regime of Primo de Rivera, this marks the start of Júpiter as a vehicle for dissent, for rebellion, for fighting back against the establishment, another vein that would become a fundamental part of the club's identity going forward. And this conveniently gives me the chance to talk about one of the most fascinating eras of Barcelona's history. For the first time on this podcast, something I've wanted to discuss for a long time. The early decades of the 20th century and the years of anarchy. Now, anarchism as a political movement. Its background, we go to the 19th century. Spain was awash with changes. After the Napoleonic and Peninsular Wars, the loss of valuable American colonies, which hurt a lot of the middle classes in Spain, and in particular Barcelona. The first Carlist wars, industrialization arriving in different parts of the country, but not everywhere, and the landowning classes and Catholic clergy undermining attempts for reform in the country. It was a politically volatile period, but with less violence in the final decades of the 19th century. Male suffrage over 25 came in 1869, meaning there were 4 million voters thrust into a country that was suffering to hold itself together at the time. There was a lot of stress testing on some of the very young political institutions and pillars of states by people who were looking to benefit financially in the short term amid so much instability. The word caciquismo became endemic, corruption also. It was widely accepted that the democratic process was a sham. It was flawed at the time. People knew it, but you had to go along with it. Come the 1880s, the end of censorship from the ruling classes, and at this time, so many new ideas entered circulation inside Spain and inside Catalonia in particular, principles imported from the rest of Europe. We saw the emergence of powerful ideologies aimed to benefit, at least in principle, the working classes, i.e. the losers of manipulated parliamentary elections and the people who often saw themselves as being exploited directly for the financial benefit of others. One of those movements was anarchism. From 1881, we see anarchist organisations in Spain, the 7th of November 1893, and they were not peaceful. These were people who did pursue violent tactics in pursuit of their political objectives, and the key date stands out as the 7th of November 1893 at the Gran Teatro del Liceo in Barcelona, on the Rambla. You've probably passed it. It's an opera house, and on that night, Rossini's William Tell was due to be performed at 11 p.m. an anarchist called Santiago Salvador sat in a circle, threw 2 Orsini bombs into the crowd below. An Orsini bomb is a hollow cast iron ball. These ones were 9.5 centimetres in diameter, and they had 18 needles around the outside, so a spiky ball basically. Those needles containing white crystals of mercury difulminate. Those exploded upon contact. The first one exploded in row 13. It killed 20 people. The second one hit one of the cadavers and failed to explode, and that was photographed. And photographs of that Orsini bomb spread all across Europe, detailing the violence that had come of Barcelona. Salvador's motive. This was revenge for the execution of an anarchist friend who attempted to assassinate General Martínez Campos. This was the most high-profile event of increasing violence from the 1890s on the behalf of the anarchists in Barcelona, which was the home of anti-monarchism and anti-centralist sentiment combined with a large working-class population. We move forward to the summer of 1909. Many public protests against a call-up for reserve soldiers who were poor, who were struggling to feed their families, to serve in what was perceived as a unnecessary and meaningless North African military campaign. The protests spread. Barcelona, 26th of July that year, the streets turned violent. The leaders of the anarchist movement lost control of the mob. In 5 days, 22 churches and 34 convents were set alight and burned. The clergy were a target for anarchists, leading the destruction. Corpses were pulled from crypts inside the churches and displayed in public. How grotesque. 104 died that week. There were 2,000 subsequent arrests, 5 of whom were executed, one of which was Francisco Ferrer, an activist and anarchist thinker. But there was scant evidence to link him to the actual violence that had taken place in the summer of 1909. Thus, the anarchists and their sympathisers believed that the military governors of Barcelona had used the violence as an excuse to lynch Francisco Ferrer and others they had had their eye on. The first 2 decades of the 20th century did see workers' rights improved. Things done on a political executive level to improve the conditions for many people having to work difficult jobs in places like Barcelona, in places like Poblino. But the violence continued. Anarchists, unionists, and on the other side, heavies and, let's use the word hitmen, paid by mercantilists and big businessmen in the area, continued to engage in opportunistic violent crime through the teens and the 20s. Júpiter played its role. The Estadio de la Calle Lul, its home from 1921, is alleged to have been used as a safe house for arms, for pistols, for weapons, for firearms. The team apparently used away games, travelling across Catalonia, to run guns around Catalonia to armed groups such as Los Solidarios. The legend says that they would hide pistols inside leather balls so that any military official, any policeman studying the ball would not be able to see the gun inside it, and that's how they got guns across the state. This is a commonly cited legend, but it's probably fictitious. Number one, we have no documented proof of anybody associated with Júpiter actually having done that, and also I'm told that a pistol of that era would only fit inside a football of that era if it was deflated. And that kind of makes it a pointless pursuit. You know, obviously, if a military guard stops you and you say, where you're going, I'm going to play a football game in Terrassa, where's your football? Here, it's here. Why is it deflated? He's going to work out what's going on. So I think that's an entirely erroneous story, but it's one I've seen quoted in many places, and it's kind of cool to think, right? I mean, not violence, but creativity, ingenuity, resourcefulness. Let's put it that way. From the wild 1920s, we move to the dark 1930s. 31, Primo de Rivera's dictatorship ends and Spain becomes a second republic. Women get suffrage in this year, and Júpiter is permitted to use its former badge, the one with the sirenia and the blue star representing the desire for Catalonian independence. But it sticks with the green and white playing colours with white shorts. The club is competing in regional Catalonian divisions, promoted the second division in 1934, where it stayed for 2 seasons, finishing 7th on both occasions. 36, it was integrated into the Comité Català pro Sports Populars, an organisation that tried to organise an Olimpiada Popular in the same year. However, the nationalist rebellion uprising in July that year made it impossible. Instead, the Olimpiada organised a tournament, invited working-class teams from different states in support of Ernst Thälmann, who was a jailed leader of the German Communist Party jailed under the Nazis. Jupiter hosted the final, and a team from Asturias triumphed. Asturias, a place where a minor revolt had taken place in 1934, which is one of the reasons why they were invited to take part in the Cup. The 25th of September 1936, pretty much as the Civil War was beginning, the Jupiter captain gifted the President of the Generalitat an insignia of the old club badge with the Sirenia and blue star on it, a very symbolic move, gesture, action to symbolise Jupiter's stance as an open supporter of the constitutional government of the Republic in the face of the right-wing rebel front, something that would prove disastrous later on. The Carellul ground, Jupiter's home ground, became a meeting point for anarchist militants fighting in the Civil War. Prominent anarchist leaders of Barcelona lived nearby, and also aliens who had recently arrived to Barcelona, to Spain, who sympathised with these political ideals, flocked to this ground. Again, I am told that the ground had a small arsenal of weapons that were used during the conflict, and soldiers were picked up by trucks from the ground and transported to battalions on the front line around the city where they would fight the right-wing forces. Football continued in Barcelona until 1938, when the bombing campaigns made it too dangerous. Rockets were firing down on the city. 1939, and Barcelona is captured by the Falangists, by the rebels, by Franco's regime. Post-Civil War, the club was castigated. It was identified as an entity unloyal to the regime, in Franco's eyes, the worst crime of them all, and new directors were placed by the regime who were loyal to him and his cronies that oversaw club activities. Dissent was not permitted on any level. The club was again obligated to remove the symbolic crest of the Sirenia and the blue star from its badge, and they were forced to change the name from Jupiter to Hercules, Club Deportivo Hercules. So the club went from a Roman god to a Greek hero. Why Hercules, or Hercules if you're a 90s kid like me? It is claimed that this figure from Greek mythology performed 12 heroic tasks to purge him of sin. Many of those were reported to have been performed in the far west. Of course, in the world of ancient Greece, that would have meant the western side of the African and European continents, which would have been the Iberian Peninsula. And that's a candidate where Hercules apparently performed his heroic tales. The myth states that Hercules, walking west, was frustrated to find a mountain blocking his passage, and in his rage he decided to pull it apart and create a giant hole through the middle, which is now the Strait of Gibraltar, with two mountain ranges either side. Therefore, the twin pillars of Hercules are effectively the Rock of Gibraltar and Jebel Musa in Morocco. Hercules, therefore, is a key figure in romanticised Spanish nationhood. Those twin pillars also found on the Andalusian flag, along with a depiction of Hercules, and on the crest of Spain's royalty now, which you can see on the Spanish flag as well. There are also some people who believe that the twin vertical lines on the dollar sign trace back to Hercules' columns, i.e. two columns going through the S, but my understanding that the symbol we know of as a dollar sign is a corruption of PS for peso, which of course was the main unit of currency for Spain's colonies in the Americas. It's also worth mentioning that medieval Castilian monarchs claimed descendants from Hercules and by extension from Zeus. Again, so typical of medieval European monarchs, just a shortcut to inherited greatness, which they quite liked. That change was only 1 year. In 1940, the club was allowed to use the name Jupiter once again. It was now Club Deportivo Jupiter, because Esportiu being a Catalan word was not permitted. Thus, it spent less than 1 year as Hercules. Jupiter continued to compete in Group B of the Primera Categoria, the second regional tier of football in Catalonia. But the regime also attempted to connect Jupiter to Real Club Deportivo Español. Now, Jupiter was to become a filial club to Español, i.e. below it, inferior to it. Español, the club of working class recent arrivals to Barcelona. Generally speaking, the predominant ideology among a lot of supporters of Espanyol is one that is pro-Spain and anti-republic and anti-separatist. Therefore, a poor choice to link to Júpiter. Both fan bases rejected the idea and it collapsed. It did not happen. Come 1944, Júpiter were promoted back up to Group 5 of La Tercera División, aka the Black Hole of the Spanish Football League, and now they were competing with similar sized clubs from Catalonia, the Balearics, and from Valencia. Júpiter's ground, the Campo de Carrer Lope de Vega. In 1941, Pedro Estany acquired ownership of the asset, and in 1946, he sold it to the Nacional de Construcciones Sociedad Anónima. That was then transferred to José Encesa in 1947, who, shortly afterward, informed the board of Júpiter that the club needed to leave the ground, they needed to vacate it. As a consequence, Júpiter, in 1948, moves north to the San Martí neighbourhood, San Martí de Provençals, a former satellite town swallowed up by Barcelona on the 28th of April 1897. From then on, it was considered a part of Barcelona and not something separate. This meant Júpiter, for the first time, moved away from Poblenou, albeit not that far. Basically, it was just the other side of Gran Via, to Camp Municipal de la Verneda, the home of Júpiter, from the 29th of August 1948. That day, a game was played against UE San Andreu from the north of the city to inaugurate the ground. La Verneda, as I'm going to refer to it from now on, now has a capacity of 3,500. It's still the home of Júpiter to this day. However, as a consequence of the move, many people of Poblenou, many of the former fans, lost interest. Some left. This translated to a decline in fortunes for the club. However, the Reducte Grisgrana, a fan group of Júpiter, they claimed the move was done ostensibly by the Falangist authorities in an attempt to purge the fan base that was active in the Republic resistance. But in spite of the move away from Poblenou, Júpiter did retain its far left identity, its association with anarchism, syndicalism, unionism, pro-Catalan independence, and with a growing interest from movers and shakers in the punk music scene of the 70s and 80s in Barcelona and Catalonia. From the height of its relevance, we now see Júpiter enter a long period of slow, painful decline. The second half of the 20th century was not kind to this club. We saw long periods of stagnation and slow drift into irrelevancy. The 50s were a poor era for the club, who struggled to compete in increasingly large Catalan regional leagues that had widened to accommodate more clubs inside them. Therefore, relegation or promotion became harder. In 1959, the club returned to its playing colours of maroon and grey for its 50th anniversary. Fast forward to 1966-67, Júpiter won the Copa Catalunya, but then in the 60s and 70s, the club saw 3 relegations and 2 promotions in those decades. The 80s, come the 86-87 season, Júpiter rose up to the Segunda B division, the third tier that was introduced in 1977 into Group 2, but finished 20th in the league that season with just 7 wins and therefore went down. In 1989, in an assembly, the crowd, the fans, voted to adopt the old club badge. Post-transition, maybe a little later than you would have expected for a club that saw itself as a vanguard for anarchism and pro-Catalan independence, but on the 2nd of September 1990, the circular badge was revealed with the sirene at the bottom and the blue star, symbolising a desire for independence, on a white background at the top. 1994, the name change, Club Deportivo Júpiter became Club Esportiu Júpiter, and then in the next 20 years we see a lot more yo-yoing between lower-level regional leagues. From 1997 to 2017, a former stalwart of the second division saw 4 promotions but 6 relegations, one of which was down to the 7th tier of Spanish football, the Primera Territorial, in 2008. But in the modern era, in our time, how is the club relevant? What is its position in the world of fan culture in Spain? That name change, the Catalan Club Esportiu Júpiter, shows a clear intent to continue marketing itself as a place as an apex for people who support Catalan independence and the separatist cause. The escudo, the badge, still has that blue star on it to this day. Júpiter is also a key member of the Catalan Football Historic Clubs tournament, aka Les Historiques. This is basically every summer, I think, a competition in which different historic but beloved clubs from around Catalonia compete with one another. Established in 1984 to commemorate the 75th anniversary of FC Martinense, the Júpiter male team has won the competition in 1985, 88 and 89, 1995 and then in 2000, and the female cantera, the Júpiter ladies side, has won this competition in 2018 and in 2019 as well. The women's and men's editions of Historics has been held at the Camp Municipal de la Berneda, Júpiter's home ground, in 2011 and 2023. The club also organises friendlies with other clubs from around the world whose fan bases openly align with far-left politics, the most notable of which is Clapton FC from the United Kingdom, where I come from. Clapton FC played a friendly versus Júpiter at La Berneda in 2019. There is no formal friendship or connection between the two, but the invitation was sent by Barcelona City Council to invite Clapton to the ground to play a friendly game that summer. Clapton FC even wore their famous Republican shirts for that game, with the red, yellow and purple colours on them. The highest profile fan group of Júpiter, we already mentioned briefly, the Reducte Grisgrana. Formed in 2015, they organise and execute tifos and choreographies in La Berneda Stadium, but they do not openly identify themselves as ultras, and certainly there's never been any public endorsement of hooliganism or orchestrated violence from the Reducte Grisgrana or any of its fans. The group claim that the club still has many fans from Poblenou in spite of the historic move to San Martí. What do they stand for? A big part of their ethos, their ideology, concerns the fight against modern commercial football, and also there's a vein of feminism inside it. The Reducte does ask its fans and members to attend the Equipo Femenino matches of Júpiter as frequently as possible, away from politics, because I know we all hear too much about politics in the media we consume all the time. Club Esportiu Júpiter is a club with community at its core. It has 30 teams, 23 of which are male, 6 of which are female, the first of which was founded in 2009, and Júpiter even has a mixed gender team inside its ranks. Together with the Reducte Grisgrana, Júpiter organises toy donations and food banks to support locals struggling in the Poblenou and St. Martin neighbourhoods. Most of this work is also voluntary, and it is also part of the constellation of fantastic initiatives led by the club here in Barcelona. As such, Club Esportiu Júpiter may not have won much on the field recently, but the Barcelona City Council has awarded the club with some distinctions thanks to its contribution to sport and to the well-being of the people of this city, notably the Gold Medal for Sporting Merit in 2010 and the Centenary Entity Distinction in 2022. So thank you, Júpiter, for everything you've done, for giving us a fascinating story and a window into Barcelona's complicated past, and also thanks to you guys for choosing to listen, for joining me on this episode. It's been a pleasure having you here. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got this far, please do give me a comment. If you've been to La Berneda and you've seen them play, it's a pretty cool ground, I must admit, even though Júpiter isn't my club. The final segment of every single episode is the Spanish recommendation of the week. And it's summer, my head is already on vacation, I'm thinking about where I'm going to be going, and what I found myself desiring recently is an espeto. If you're not familiar, this is one of the seafood delicacies from Malaga and Granada province in Andalusia. Basically, you take a skewer of wood, you stick it through about 4 freshly caught sardines, and you grill them directly on the beach for an hour, a couple hours. Delicious, fantastic. Put that together with a cold glass of Manzanilla sherry. You won't have a better meal all summer, I promise you. If you're vegetarian, then please ignore that recommendation. Guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Great to have you here, and look forward to seeing you again. Cheerio and goodbye. because it gets less foot